Hey, it's Dan Kenner with another episode of The Casual Author. Today is Monday, September 25th, 2023, as I record this. And this is episode number 90 of the podcast. Today, we're talking to Chad Pettit about writing truth or being true to your writing as an author. So we go in depth into pitfalls some authors may fall into with not writing truth and not writing authentically, particularly from a character development standpoint and how that comes through to the reader. We talk a lot about how he has gone through a journey to writing his truth and how that has changed the way he writes as an author. I think you'll want to stick around for that. We have a lot of really frank and honest conversations about writing, and we talk a little bit about, from a reader's perspective, what that might look like if you do not write authentically or you don't write that truth. So want to stick around for that part of the conversation. In terms of updates on the Kenner homestead, not a lot has changed. I feel like we're always busy, but not a lot changes, primarily because we are still in the milking twice a day phase, or we need to milk those goats twice a day. We are going to be tapering off on that in the next month or so, which we're looking forward to. It is nice to have a really high volume of milk for a little bit of time because we can make lots of cheeses. We can freeze dry a lot of it, preserve it for the winter. But it is pretty crazy, because they need to be milked right about the time we make dinner normally. So we try to do a little bit of preparation for dinner, and then we go out and milk as fast as we can, and then we come in, and at that point we're finishing off dinner later than we normally like, which means the kids go to bed later than we normally like. And it's all fine. It's times and seasons. There's seasons of longer milking, more milking, and then seasons of less. So we are looking forward to tapering off on that, though. There's been a lot of milk. My wife has made a lot of cheese, and we have a lot of preservation done, which is amazing. But I think we're almost to the point where we could use more time in our schedule to do some winter preparation. So in terms of winter preparation for our homestead, we are making progress on that chicken run. We're building that outdoor chicken run for our chickens. I cemented the poles a couple weeks ago. This last weekend, I was able to go work on putting up some of the framing for the fence. So we put on some, what's the word I'm looking for, reinforcing beams from pole to pole in the middle and at the top. And it was so fun to work with my 9-year-old. My 8-year-old helped a little bit as well, but mostly the 9-year-old just was very creative. He did all of the measuring and the marking, and obviously I used the saw and did the cutting, but it was really fun to work out there with him. He's also very creative because, he was coming up with solutions to do it faster and how we can be more efficient. I just loved how excited he was to do that. So we had a blast. We got the framing bits of it done. We still have to cement one more pole. We didn't get enough. We haven't been able to go to the store yet, but we did all of the framing, all the already cemented in poles. Now we just have to put up the gates and put the fencing, which is pretty amazing. We're making a lot more progress. The other things we need to figure out is winterizing the goat pens. We need to clean them all out in preparation for winter. We do the deep litter method. You've never heard of that if you're not a homesteader or a farmer, but essentially, rather than muck their pens every week, you just add little bits of bedding and some smell eliminating things. It's just this powder that you put in there, and you just add and add and add, and then twice a year, or once a season, however you want to do it, you just pull everything out and replace. So it's a pretty big job. You're kind of punting the work week to week down to a big job once every few months, but it works for us. We like it. It's more efficient for us in a way with all the children. But we're going to be doing that soon. I will be doing that soon. Because my wife takes care of the kids while I do that. No complaints. It's just the circumstances of our family. So I'm looking forward to doing that. We got to do it for the chickens. Normally, actually, this time we don't have to do it for the chickens because the chickens have been out in our fields all summer, just foraging and having the times of their lives out in our fields. So that's amazing. But we'll be putting them in. And the other thing we have to figure out is goat and chicken waters. Historically, I have just carried buckets of hot water out to the animals twice a day in the cold of winter, in the dead of winter. When it's -15 out, that bucket of water is going to freeze in a few hours. So I had to go out a few times a day with hot buckets. It's not ideal. It's worked for us, but this year we're going to be solutioning that a little bit and actually getting water warmers. They're just these little things that you can float in, or even the hot plate underneath, depending on how we want to do it. And it'll keep the water warm during the cold winter. So that'll be amazing. It'll be nice to only have to fill up waters once a day and not have to go out multiple times a day. But those are the types of things we need to figure out. So that's where we're leading into on the homestead, is just doing some of that winter prep. We also did a kind of a mass harvest. I think I talked a little bit about that last week. We pulled all of our plants in preparation for cold. We've already had some freezing nights here in Idaho, which is pretty amazing. End of September, and we're already getting, low 30s, mid 30s weather. And we have cold pockets in our garden where even though it's, say, 40 in one place, in that cold pocket, it's 12 to 15 degrees colder. So because of that, we mass pulled a lot of things. We got around 200 pounds of tomatoes that we need to process. We're just waiting for them to ripen. We've just been processing, making jams, making canned things. It's been great. Very tiring. We had a lot of late nights, but our kids have become champions at skinning or peeling. That's what I'm looking for. Peeling fruit. They're great at it. So that's one plus. I don't believe there's any other updates in terms of Homestead. In terms of authoring, I completed my edits of the second book of the Cyber City, The Kids of Cyber City. Absolutely loved it. Rereading through it, I thought this is amazing. Just having a blast with these kids. Middle grade sci-fi trilogy, and I just dove into book 3 edits. Now I'm determined to get edits done more quickly on this book because I feel bad that my co-author has had to wait for me for so long. And so I've set an arbitrary goal of completing my edits by the end of this week. That gives me 1 week to go through it. I think it's realistic enough. I do put enough time into it that I could make it work. I just have to be a little more disciplined and methodical with my edits, which that's, if you know Dan Kenner, I'm not methodical. I fly by the seat of my pants more often than I'd like to admit. But this week, I'm doing it. I'm determined. So I think I'm on track for finishing the edits. And I'll get them back to her on Friday, which means then I will get back to the writing phase, which is going to be amazing. I'm going to still sit on Dragon Blooded edits for just a little bit longer. I need to think about the story a little bit more. I think writing forward is going to help me. So I'm going to write into Demon Blooded, see how far I can get in that, potentially finish it before I jump back to Dragon Blooded to help me ground myself in the story a little bit more because I'm a discovery writer. So that's the plan. But not that... this sounds so negative, but getting the edits of the Cyber City Kids out of the way will help me get back to that creative mindset, which I'm absolutely looking forward to. I love the writing process. I could write all day if I could. Obviously, I can't, given the circumstances. Not a problem. But yeah, I'm excited to get back into the writing phase. My short story that I've written is in edits as well. So I have my editor looking at that. I need to review those edits to make sure I can submit it in 5 days, which is pretty crazy. Never submitted anything to a competition before. Once again, that's Writers of the Future. It's a short story competition for novices or aspiring writers. Anyway, I think it's going to be great. We'll see what happens. I'm not necessarily going to be dependent on winning, but I think it's interesting. It provided a new challenge for me, and I'm considering just doing it every quarter for fun. If I can get in the habit of writing these short stories, I'm thinking I could either start selling them for very cheap, get people to get a taste of my writing, or I can just start collecting them, for use at a later time. I mean, I will always use my writing as effectively as possible. Maybe I'll put them up on like a website to funnel people in to learn more about my writing, or, I could provide it for my email list. The problem with writing short stories is it opens up a new realm of story that I want to dive into. So this most recent short story, my first short story that I've ever written, I already think I could write a pretty decent series off of this short story. But that's not always the answer. As an author, there's so many things that we want to write, but you really have to be strict, decisive about those things that you do write. So that's going to be my biggest challenge, is reining myself in with these short stories, because I'm just going to want to go wild. I'm thinking I should probably jump back to the Library Chronicles and see if I can write off side stories or prequels of different characters. That might help me rein it in a little bit better, because I'm not starting on something new, but my inclination is just to keep writing new short stories, drawing in new characters, drawing new worlds, and then putting pegs in my future for what I'd like to write, if that makes sense. That, I think, is the plan for me continuing writing short stories for this competition. I don't believe that I have any other updates for my author business, so we can go ahead and shift over to the interview portion of the podcast. Hey, Chad, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to talk to you and learn more about what you're working on and how you go about writing your books. Before we get into that, how long have you been writing and publishing?
So writing, publishing separate. I've been writing since before I could write. I was telling stories as a kid. I don't even remember my parents tell me these stories that I was making them up as I went along. But as soon as I could write, I was writing. So I read Roald Dahl when I was like maybe 7 or 8. Read my first Roald Dahl book, and I wanted to be a writer ever since. So off and on, been working on it forever, and I started officially publishing back in 2016.
Nice. All right. I get the whole writing, publishing discrepancy. It's the same for most people. Less
Yeah.
so for me because I haven't been writing my whole life, but I think your story is pretty common. A lot of people have been wanting to write since they were kids. By the way, Roald Dahl, great picks.
Oh
Those
my gosh, yes.
Loved those books as a kid. So you write dystopian books and apocalyptic type stories as well. Is that correct? And Christian
Yeah,
books, or you
I've
have
always
published those?
yeah, so I started out in my publishing journey, I started out writing Christian fiction, and I was always the guy who was writing on the fringe, writing the fantasy stuff, bringing in the supernatural, little graphic for the audience. And I enjoyed those books, enjoyed those characters, but I've always really, really liked, well, I shouldn't say always, but I guess around the same time I started teaching, I really started getting into dystopian literature and apocalyptic fiction, because I guess that's just what we give teenagers now, which may not be the best approach.
That's what the classroom's like. That's what you're trying to tell us, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Just kidding.
But I find it really relatable. If you actually look through history and current times, I mean, there are dystopians in this world where we live
Mhm.
right now. And I don't know, it's like we're always on the edge of an apocalypse, it seems like.
Kind of feels that way. I think there's so many things, once again, not a political podcast, but it's just ironic to see some things that happen in the world. It's just like, oh, that's uncomfortably close to this dystopian book that I
Yeah,
read.
absolutely.
So kind of crazy.
Yeah, I'm a huge I love the tradition of the people like Margaret Atwood and
Hmm.
Ayn Rand, and I always say her name wrong and I apologize, but Ray Bradbury, probably one of my favorite authors, George Orwell and Aldous Huxley. 4 people on the planet can understand Aldous Huxley, but his they the books were warnings to us, and I feel like there needs to be a renaissance of warnings of like, hey, if we continue this behavior, here's a possible way it could go. And I like playing out those scenarios in my head. And so I'm kind of working on an apocalyptic pre-dystopian book right now. And man, I'm having the most fun I've ever had writing a book.
I think that's the most important part is that you enjoy what you're writing. I've heard the story from multiple authors that write to market or write something intentional but hate it. It's like, is it worth it to not enjoy what you're writing? But
Yeah, and I think there's a line where you can write stories that the market wants. There is a market for your work, but at the
Mhm,
same time, man, do we forget that there are the authors who inspired us who created a market,
mhm,
right? Name one fantasy author who doesn't trace their writer lineage back to J.R.R. Tolkien or
mhm.
C.S. Lewis,
True. Yeah.
and I will name a liar because they all do.
Mhm,
Right, I grew up reading the R.A. Salvatore and the Dark Elf books, and he flat out rips off the plot of The Hobbit. Like,
mhm,
Streams of Silver is the plot. We're gonna get a dwarf who's gonna go reclaim his kingdom, and he's taking an elf who's like flawless in battle with him, and oh, there's a dragon who has the secret mountain kingdom. I'm like, come on, man, you could have been a little less heavy-handed with it, but they were inspired by those guys, and they created that whole genre. Forgotten Realms was born out of kids reading those books and playing the games. And so, yeah, I agree. If you want to be successful as an author who's making money from your writing, of course, you're going to have to market it. You're going to have to put it out there to people. And people want to read certain books. Like, you are never going to shake a romance reader out of the way they want to
true.
read and things they want to see, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are ways of, there's a balance. Write what you love at the same time. If you're just writing to market and it's just a job, I've just heard too many stories of authors. They're not around anymore. They burned out.
Mm-hmm.
It's not sustainable.
Yep. And there definitely is a balance. I'm not the market expert on this, but I've listened to enough and learned enough to know that there's definitely a balance between the two. Obviously, if you want to be successful, you do have to write to market to some degree, but at the same time, you know, don't hate what you write. Otherwise, the burnout comes.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
which is unfortunate. So for you, what is the dream? I mean, you started writing with Christian fantasy. You've made a little bit of I would say, a pretty big shift to dystopian apocalyptic. I mean, I know how some of those things
Yeah.
can relate. Sure, those things can relate to some degree, but quite different. So what's the story there?
Yeah. So it's, you know, I come from a childhood with no religion.
Mm,
I did not grow up in a Christian home, didn't grow up in a home where religion was even discussed. My mom had a Bible, but she had a bookshelf, and this bookshelf was the catalyst for future Chad, and it was right by the TV. So in the 80s and the early 90s, the TV was not the focal point of the living room for a lot of houses, and mine certainly wasn't. We had these big bookshelves, and on both sides, books, encyclopedia sets.
hmm
My mom had the everything Tolkien had at the time. She had all the Narnia books. She had the Little House on the Prairie. I was just constantly reading, and that was like the inspiration for me. So coming from wanting to write, and then around the time I was 27, I became a Christian. And a huge turning point in my life, like complete, either make some changes or it's going to be very dark for you. And unfortunately, I got involved in a cult,
mm,
not like locked gate cult, but definitely theologically a cult, controlled pretty much everything you do, the way you think, the way you act. And I was writing the Christian fiction as I was kind of emerging from that. And so, it was like, is it even okay for me to write this? And I started really seeing all the fighting that goes on. And not to dive too deep into that because I don't want to. But you read the reviews of Christian fiction novels, and the readers would just trash these authors if it was one thing off theologically, if it was a word that was used they didn't like or a scenario they didn't like. And I experienced some of that. My books were somehow, and they were written for an adult audience. They were graphic. They were somehow published, marketed to teen romance readers.
hmm.
And so you've got this scene of something extremely graphic being read by like a 14-year-old girl. And morally, I'm not okay with that. And then just from a market perspective, horrible. So that affected the reviews, that affected a lot of things. And I started just seeing, and it got to the point where I was like, I'm really trapped. I'm trapped. I have to write this way. I have to write in this bubble. And there are things I want to do and I want to say in my writing that I just can't. And I finally am fully kind of emerged from and broken away from that fundamental cult that I was locked in. And now it's like, you know what? I want to enjoy writing again, because it got to the point where writing was work and I
Hmm.
wasn't enjoying it. I was not enjoying writing. I took a year where I didn't even come to the computer. I didn't pick up a pen. I didn't write anything. And it's always been the world's falling apart. Let me go write. Let me go write. And instead it became this chore. And then when you're teaching English and you're teaching writing, well, that just makes it worse, because now, like, this is what I do at work. And I come home and it's not giving me any relief from my stress. So finally I had to say, what is it I want out of this? And what I want out of it is to tell honest stories. And even though dystopian and apocalyptic fiction is made up, I feel like it's really honest, because you're diving deep into things about society that are important to you, but you're doing it in a non-preachy way. I don't know if that answered your question. I lost track.
Yeah, you answered so many questions with that, which I think is excellent. But I think that's the perfect segue into, kind of a lead-in question or a lead-off question of that. Being true in your stories, I think that's a really important piece for authors, because as readers, I think would be surprising to some authors how readers can detect that. It just comes
Mm-hmm.
through the writing. Having been I'm an avid reader myself. You're a reader. You can just tell stories that don't feel authentic, even though they're
Yeah.
not real. It's kind of the authenticity definitely comes through even with fiction stories. So for you, what does that look like when you're writing, when you're reading? What does that honesty look like when you're reading that content?
Yeah, sure. So, well, Stephen King says this, the first draft, right with the door closed, and that draft is for you. And I do agree with that to a point. I currently have people reading my novel as I'm writing it, which is
Oh, interesting.
scary. I've never done this before, but at the same time, I've got a live test audience, and they're like texting me in the middle of the night, like, "Have you written anything? We need more." And
That's
so it's
awesome.
it's I've really enjoyed it. But as I'm reading books and was like, I could tell the author was holding back here. This is like that was a market decision. So I'll use you as an example, Dan. So you write books and you talk about on your page and your TikTok how you write clean books.
Hmm.
But that is a decision you've made,
Right.
right? And so that's going to come through authentically. But there are a lot of people who are writing in different genres who are writing clean books because they feel like they have to.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's different. That's not the same thing. And when I was writing clean books, uh, and what I mean by clean is like nobody can cuss. Certain things are off limits, right? Um, there's debate on whether or not that's clean. It's subjective, but
Yes, that's true.
that was 100% somebody else making that decision for me. Like working with a traditional publisher, a traditional Christian publisher, you could not use the phrase, "Oh my God." You could not. But if it was honestly the way that character would talk, and here's the thing, in the book, the character used it. The other character reprimands the character. And so it's like I'm doing exactly what you're trying to accomplish, but you're telling me I can't say it. So
Mm.
like that just feels disingenuous. And I'm sorry, but when I stub my toe in the middle of the night, I don't say, "Oh, Pringles." You
I don't
know,
either.
yeah, but some people might. And here's the thing. If it's honest for that character, if that character absolutely would stub his or her toe and say, "Oh, Pringle can," well, then that's what that character would say. And so you write that because it's honest to that character. But if that character wouldn't, now again, you want to write to market and you want to make some changes, okay, you can make some adjustments. But that first draft, it's nothing's holding me back. I'm saying what pops into my head. I'm getting it out on the page, and I'm being totally honest about it. Um, and so that's really what it is for me when I'm reading a book. I want to know the author wasn't holding back. I want the characters to not be contrived. I don't want the dialogue to be canned. And when I'm writing my stories, I want the characters to be representative of a real person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And it's something that I'm a very character driven author and a character driven reader as well. I will not push through a book if the characters are flat or boring or unrealistic. I just don't care. Like plots are fine, but for me, the characters matter. I can actually think of an example. I won't give the name of the author, but it's a really popular author who, they're very, very well known. But I was reading one of their books, and one of the characters who I really, really enjoyed, there are these made up cuss words, so to speak, in this world, which is fine. Like generally swear words don't bother me too much. I don't like to write them. I don't prefer to read them, but I will if the book is really good. In
Mm-hmm.
any case, this character used a modern day cuss word out of the blue, out of context. And I was like, that just made no sense. Like
Right.
it's not in the book anywhere else. There are these other words, and there's just a single swear word, and I was like, that's just random. Like for me, that
Yeah.
just brought me out of the story. Like that is not in character. It's not in this world, and so it's stuff like that that just distracts me. It's like that's not how I
Yep.
think this character is. You've portrayed them as X, and then they made this decision, and I'm left wondering why, because that's out of character for them. So
Yeah. That's really what I'm trying to say, that it's not honest, and now you have failed to fulfill your promise to the reader.
mhm.
So, and here's what you have to understand: when you're writing that book, that first chapter sets up the promise for the reader. It's going to be a suspense story. Okay. So let's say I start with the action, and there's a person who goes missing. My promise to the reader is we're going to find out what happened to that missing person. All right. But within that same chapter, I'm also establishing codes, some codes of this is how you might see these kinds of words. You're going to see maybe some graphic images. Okay. In that first chapter, you can feel out, is this the kind of book for me or not? So if in chapter 1, I've established this is a clean book. These characters don't use this kind of language. If there are swear words, they're made up swear words or whatever. This is going to be this kind of book. And in chapter 42, the character just randomly drops an F-bomb. That's not okay. You've broken your promise to the reader. And that to me is dishonest. Why'd you do that? Because, well, you thought it would shock value? That's just lazy writing.
Well, and you can look at the opposite example, just for the sake of listeners as well. Those who like to write spicy content or adult content filled books. Once again, fine, you're at liberty to write what you want. If you start a book out that way, and then all of a sudden have this weird, like benign chapter that has none of those things, it just feels weird. It's just like, what is this chapter? It's out of character. It just doesn't fit the tone that you've set for this book. So how can you be sure as an author that you are delivering on those promises while you're writing?
Yeah, well, I think you have to decide what it is you want to accomplish, right? So in the book I'm writing at the moment, I want my reader at the end to question themselves. I want them to really think, what would I do in that situation? You can hate this character. That's okay. I might want you to hate this character, but before you do that, I also want you to empathize. I want you to think, well, yeah, what that character did was terrible, no question. But man, look at the circumstances. Would I be different? And at the end, really think, what if? And so I'm proceeding to that. You're going to get an entertaining novel, right? I'm setting up in chapter 1. You're going to get my humor. I'm going to let that just shine through. You're also going to get certain things. You're going to get some violence. You're going to get some cliffhangers. That's going to happen. It's all going to be resolved in the end. And in the end, you're going to sit back. It's sort of like The Road by Cormac McCarthy, I think was the most haunting book I've ever read in my life. At the end of that book, I just sat and stared at the wall and thought, wow. And you know what's coming. He doesn't hide it. You know how it's going to end. But he still manages to keep you engaged the whole time. And so when it does end, you say to yourself, I knew that was coming. It was still painful. It still hurt. And how do I feel about this? I don't know how I feel. What would I do? How could I handle that situation? That's what I want from my readers. So I think it's really, whether you're a person who's discovering the book while you're writing it, whether you're a person who plots it out meticulously, you've got to decide at some point, what is it I want my reader to gain from this? All right. What do I have to do to get them there?
And I think that you brought up some really good points. And I was about to bring up the discovery writer versus plotter, because obviously it's possible for either type of writer. They're both successful in their own way. But yeah, I like what you said, deciding beforehand, having a conviction of what content you're bringing, and then it's in your mind, whether you're in the plotting phase or the discovery writing phase. And so it's almost easier to put it in there and stay true to it because of those convictions that you've made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what I'm doing now by allowing some test readers to read the book as I'm writing it, which I do not recommend.
Okay.
It's one of those things, like, I made this choice to do it. The people who are reading it are perfect for the book. Like, they're the audience. I just happen to work with them, and they're perfect for it. They're not going to be offended by any of the stuff I'm putting in there. But I am conscious of it. So as I'm writing, here's the beauty of it. As I'm writing it, I'm thinking about them at this point. So I started out, I was just writing. And then I said, let me share this, because I thought it was going to be a short story. I'm like, let me share this with them. And I'm like, should I keep going? And they're like, yeah, keep going, see how it ends. And I'm like, well, yeah, okay. Turns out it's a novel. And they're like, okay, well, we want more. We want more. So I keep giving them more. And as I'm writing, I'm thinking about them. I'm thinking about, hold on, how would they respond to that? But I'm not just thinking like, oh, don't put this in there because they might get offended. Not that. thinking more like they're going to be thinking this is going to happen. Let me lull them into a comfort zone so I can hit them with the plot twist here in a little bit. And every single time that's happened. So today they read the most recent chapter and they both texted me just distraught. They're like, I'm like, yeah, but you've been like, oh, this is so good, so good. Oh my gosh, what just happened? Why did you do that? So I'm writing, and a lot of marketers recommend this. Find your person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a Bible reference of find your Timothy. The pastor, Timothy is the one he trained up to take over. Paul, the apostle Paul, trained him to take him up and take over. And that's as far as I'll go politically or religiously, I promise. But the principle, find someone to cater to as an audience, right? And so I've kind of found my people. These are my people, and I'm writing for them. Now, is it going to appeal to other people? Sure. But I'm writing specifically with those people in mind. And a lot of marketers recommend find a person in real life, sit down and talk to that person, ask that person, what do you like in a book? What do you expect in a book? What do you hate? What drives you nuts? What do you want to see more of? What are some tropes that are out just overdone, cliche at this point? What sort of characters do you like? And that will help you write a book that you are passionate about, that you can be honest about, but at the same time, now you know it's marketable because you've already found your market.
There's so much to unpack from that. Incredible advice. I'm going to go ahead and come out and say that I'm not perfect at this either. The finding your ideal reader, identifying your reader, it can be challenging in some degree, but it's exactly that kind of compass that helps during the writing phase and marketing phase who are the people you're trying to reach, because there's billions of people in the world.
Yes.
You can find them, but no one book is going to reach every single reader. Everyone has different preferences. And
Sure.
so deciding who that person is an important piece of that as well. So I just want to take a little bit of a step back because I'm curious to know kind of a pros cons comparison of, because you did mention prior to diving into that why you would not recommend giving your chapters earlier to people, and then it seems like it's going really well. So I'm curious to know what based on your experience, why would be the reasons not to release your books chapter by chapter to people.
Well, the difference is published or unpublished. I've written somewhere between 8 and 10 novels.
Okay.
I've been writing all my life. I've been studying the craft. I've also had a consistent track record of sharing first or second drafts with people and them saying to me, this is really clean. Sharing drafts with a professional editor and getting very minimal edits back. So that took I'm 43. It took me a very long time to get to that point. And even then, I still wouldn't recommend it. And Stephen King, if he were listening to me right now, would slap me across the face. Like, absolutely not. That first draft is for you. And here's the thing. The next draft of this book might eliminate some of those characters. It might eliminate the setting. It might be a completely different setting, a completely different main character. And so I don't recommend it because you really need to have a lot of confidence that there's not going to be much change to it as you're going. I am doing this now because I'm writing in a brand new genre, but I've got people who know the genre really well and people who also kind of fit the type of reader I'm going for. And so I'm getting live feedback. It's like I put together my own secret writers conference, and I've got my people, because you can go to a writers conference, you can share your work with people, and a writers workshop, not conference, but you go to a writers workshop and share each other's work and critique. I'm getting all that live, right? If you don't have that, if it's just don't share your first draft with your mom, don't share your first draft with a significant other. The other thing is, I learned this the hard way. When you're really just starting out as a writer, or even if you're an established writer but you're trying to build your stamina, don't talk about your writing to people, because for some reason, as soon as you do, now the water faucet turns off and you can't make it happen, or you lose your commitment to it, right? And I don't know why that is. I don't understand the phenomenon of, I told some people, yeah, I'm writing a book about this, and then 10 years later, what happened to that book? I'm like, what are you even talking about? And so for a couple of reasons. One, if you're not an experienced writer, who's gotten a lot of critiques, I definitely wouldn't recommend it. For the second reason, if you are not confident that that book's going to be pretty close to what you're writing now with minimal major changes, I definitely wouldn't recommend it. And if you haven't found your perfect audience, absolutely not. But that's my personal advice. Do what you want. It's your book. Have fun. Go for it.
Well, I mean, I think it kind of depends on the type of author, right? Because there are people out there who are just writing to write, right? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's just like a passion project. They're not really trying to reach readers. They're just writing because the story's in their mind and they need to get it out there. And then there's also those authors out there that they do want to make something of their writing. They want to reach readers. They want to sell books and maybe not become a bestseller. I mean, if that's your goal, great. But they just want to have a business off of it. Yeah, there's two different types of writing, and what that looks like probably depends on you and where you are. But determining what you want out of it, I think, is a big piece of it, and then leading into those things. I don't think I've ever talked to anybody about the actual writing process. When someone tries to ask me what my books are about, I just say, like, you'll figure it out. Like,
Yeah.
I don't go into too many details, mainly because I'm a discovery writer, so I don't always know. Sometimes, like, I can't really put it into words. But yeah, that is an interesting point. There is something strange about sharing too much information and kind of losing that motivation, the ability to just surge forward and keep writing that book. So it's interesting to hear that you've had that experience as well.
Yeah, I don't know why it is, but I've heard it from lots of authors and writers. They're like, yeah, just never. It's a secret that doesn't even don't even I don't even. My wife's like, what are you working on?
A book.
You know, but at the same time, you know, it's everyone's different, and you're right. There are people who are just writing to write. Some people are writing because they want to share it with their family. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Like my
Yeah.
family's I just want my family to see me. Well, then by all means, do what you want. Do what you want to do. You're not even worried about it. Now, down the road, maybe you want to do something with it. Great, wonderful. But yeah, establish, and that comes back to that honest writing thing. Figure out what it is you want to do before you get too deep into this thing, right? I don't need to see my name on the TV screen. I don't need it. Um, I don't I don't need to hit the New York Times bestseller list because there are a lot of writers who are making a living from writing who are not on any bestseller list. They're selling direct or they're selling through other channels or whatever. I'm not looking to make Amazon rich. I want to write because it is at the core of who I am. Now, do I want to make a profit from my work? Sure, I believe all artists should be and can be compensated for their work. But if you want to write and give your stuff away for free, you can do that too, man. Embrace
Mm-hmm.
your Andy Warhol. Go for it.
Yeah, that is quite the different experience, but I get what you mean with that. So I agree with everything you say, to just make sure you understand the purpose and why you're going about it. That does help you be honest with your writing as well. Because I think if you try to force something, comparison is the thief of joy. I've heard that said. Comparing yourself to other authors, like, oh, this author is writing this content and they're doing so well, whatever that content is, I'm going to do it. Well, that's not really being true to yourself,
Mm.
unless maybe it is. Maybe people can change their mindset. They can become something if they want to. But I think there's a lot of forcing that happens just to try to get sales, like X author or X author, right? They want to write
Mhm.
that content and it just falls flat because it's not them. So,
Yeah. And that happens in marketing. Like
mhm.
somebody comes out and here's where there's a lack of integrity in the author field. And really you have people coming out that are saying, here's how I became an international bestseller. Like, that's awesome that you became an international bestseller. You hit the market with this particular thing at this particular time.
Mhm.
So, yay, Hugh Howey and Mark Dawson, which are fantastic people, and they're doing amazing things for the industry. And Mark Dawson has helped so many authors, and that's fantastic, right? And I love it. And I've got nothing negative to say. However, you are not going to be able to just take what somebody else did and duplicate it unless you can travel back in time.
Mhm.
Mark Dawson hit at the Kindle boom,
Mhm.
and that is why he and his marketing prowess and the fact that he's just a brilliant man. But now you've got Mark Dawson, who's now one of his series is going to be is being turned into a television series. He's successful in multiple countries. He's selling courses, but the lack of integrity is people come along and they say, here's how I did it, and here's how you can do it. And they try to sell it. But what they're not doing is helping you generate the sales. They're
Mm-hmm.
selling you a course, right? And so, you have the recent drama coming out on Book Talk of you can only use this kind of word
Mm-hmm.
because well, if you trace it far enough down the line, and if you call me, I'll help you use those words correctly. I'll make your book better if you call me. Really, you need me. So we're going to create these elitist rules that everybody has to follow, and then we're going to sell you a course. By the way, I want to be clear, that's not what Mark Dawson's doing. He's helping people, but he is making money off his courses as well. But he's doing it with integrity. And if you're going to copy something, copy being the honest writer with integrity and the honest marketer with integrity. Don't be a sleazeball.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's quite a difference between, and this can come across in books as well. There's quite a difference of someone who's just trying to make money and someone who's genuinely trying to help or entertain and make money while doing it. Obviously, the money aspect is just going to be part of it, particularly if you want to actually have a business. But I can tell you, as a newer author, way back when, I started publishing in 2020, there were some courses that's like, oh, that looks great on the surface. Invest in the course. Oh, it's just not like I detect there's an instinct about a person that's just like, this doesn't feel good. This just doesn't feel right. And that's the danger, is being able to distinguish between truth and actual helpful information and those who are just money grabbers, for lack of a better term, right? They're out there. I mean, and the thing is, they're successful. There's a lot you can do to create an empty course, or, create flashy marketing around something that's really expensive, but not actually that good. And you can get tons of money from it. So there's just be cautious as you're looking into people and what they're offering, the advice they're giving, and just trust your instinct. I think that's another big piece of it.
Yeah, it's easy to trap an author because one, we're really empathetic. We're emotional people. Like, even if you haven't been writing all your life, if you have those author instincts, those writer instincts, you're a person who's you're going to respond to emotion, right? And it's easy to funnel us. Want to increase your book sales? Boom, there's the top of the funnel. Got us, right? And it's so easy to hit those SEO, search engine optimization keyword phrases. It's easy to do that. So that's the problem. It's so easy to take advantage of authors. So starting out, when I published a book years and years and years ago, book of poetry, and there were two options. It was traditional publishing, get an agent, it's going to take you years to do it, eventually a publisher, or you can self-publish. And the only way to self-publish, there was no Kindle. That wasn't even a thing. There was no ebooks. The only thing you had was vanity presses. The problem with the vanity press, basically, it's an independent publisher. You pay them and they'll do the book cover for you. It's going to be terrible. They'll do the copy for you, the book, the back cover. They'll do the editing for you, all that stuff. You give them a set price and they'll do all that stuff, right? And that sounds great. Well, I don't have the money. So, right, like, I don't know what it is about writers, but we seem to be in the starving artist category. We seem to be
it's true.
The people who are like really successful, a certain portion of authors who are really successful come from a marketing background or a business background. They're like, yeah, I just sold my business and dumped $50,000 into marketing. I'm like, dude, I can't put $5 of gas in my truck. Like, okay. So you've got these vanity presses and they make these promises. Yeah, your book will be available for bookstores. You can get it in bookstores, and you can get it here, and you can get it there, and we'll take care of all the editing for you and all this stuff. And they'll call up authors, and you're like, yeah, tell us about your book. Here's a secret: real publishers don't call you unless you are a Mark Dawson or a Stephen King. So basically, they make you pay them to self-publish your book, and then now you have a book with a subpar cover, not so great editing, because here's the tip, folks: a cover editing, professional editing, all the back cover copy, that's going to cost more than $1,500. Okay, you're not going to do that for that amount of money, and then you still have to do the marketing, but now you have to give them a royalty off of that. Like, those are snakes. And so I tell people all the time, stay away from the vanity presses, man. If they say they're a publisher, but they're charging a fee, They're a vanity press. You need to run away, report them. They're terrible.
Absolutely. And fortunately, it was actually my lack of funds which prevented me from going with a vanity publisher. Because when I started looking into publishing options, I thought that was, and there was Kindle books existed. I just hadn't done a lot of research around it yet. And I was like, oh, maybe this is the way you have to do it. I was like, I think they were trying to get me to pay $5,000 or something wild for it. I was like, that's not going to happen. So I guess maybe I'm not going to publish.
Yeah.
And then, that's when you find out about the self-publishing options. And I mean, I still spent quite a bit of money in the editing and cover design, but it wasn't quite 5,000. It was a
Yeah.
little bit less than that. And there's still something more satisfying around knowing that you did a good job, that everything was done well because you were the one overseeing it. So
Yeah.
yes, beware of vanity publishers. They're not worth your time or money.
Yeah. Yeah. And good on you for
Yeah,
avoiding it. They got me. So
well, I think your story is actually relatively common. I've talked to plenty of people on this podcast who said, yeah, well, my first publishing experience, I did go with a vanity publisher. Sometimes they had the right, sometimes they didn't. Like, it's kind of crazy what types of things contractually they can sneak in there in some of these
yeah.
vanity publishers. But lesson learned, and here you are sharing your story and explaining what to avoid and what not to avoid. And I think it's perfect. Your story is what helps newer authors.
Yeah.
So
And I can honestly say I've done everything except going with one of the big publishers with an agent. Like I have published through a vanity press through a pen name that will never be found. I have independently published under Chad Pettit, and I did all of that myself, like 100%. And then I went through a traditional publisher. It was a small publisher, but a real publisher. They paid for everything. They did all of that. Um, the myth. You still have to do the marketing. I don't care if you're with the top 5 or the bottom 50. You're gonna have to market the book as the author.
mm-hmm.
So if you don't want to do that, then write your books, give them to your family, throw them up on the internet, and walk away. But if you want to make a living from your writing, you're gonna have to market them.
Mm-hmm.
I've done all those things. The only thing I haven't done is gone through the process of getting an agent. But at this point in time, it's almost like, is that even worth it at this point? Because if you go that route, it's going to take you years to get an agent, or months, and then months or years for them to find the right publisher, and then months or years for that publisher to get the book out. And by the time it's like, oh yeah, I did write a book a couple decades ago. I forgot about that. How do I market it? Let me read it so I remember what it's about, So I don't know. So I can make an informed decision. I have decided to go independent this time, because I realized that chasing the agent and chasing Simon and Schuster is pure vanity. 100%. I just want to be able to say I'm with one of the top 5. But you can look all over TikTok and you can see these authors who have been honest about, yep, I got the 6-figure advance and my book sales tanked, and now the publisher doesn't want to do anything with me, and now you can't get another publisher, so now you have no choice. You got to go independent.
Mm-hmm. So crazy. I mean, I've done an episode with Gabriel Gates. He's self-published. He is also published through a traditional publisher with an agent. Super interesting. But I'm the same way. I looked at the time to market, time to getting your book out there, as well as, frankly, I hate writing query letters. I wrote exactly 2. I was like, this sucks.
They are the worst.
I'm not doing this anymore. It's my personality. It was just one of those things where I don't want to have to pander to these individual people just so that they might consider looking at my book. It's just not worth my time. I would rather be writing books and actually doing something with it. So once again, this is not a knock on traditional publishing. Some people, they love it. They love how long it takes. Mm-hmm. Awesome. You do what you want. I just knew it wasn't for me. So
yeah, and that's the thing. It's choice. It's choice. Mm-hmm. Decide what it is you want. There are so many people, they write their book and they're like, okay, now what do I do with it? Mm-hmm. And I get that. And that's kind of how most of us are. Well, here's the tip. Your first book, you do nothing with it. You put that back in the drawer and you go write another one. Your first book is to get all the garbage out of your system. And maybe your first 2 or 3. I don't know how many books I've actually written.
I want to know now. How many books actually written?
There's some bad ones, some really, and trying my process. I'm going to discover as I write. I hate the term pantser. I'm a discovery writer. You know, in the UK, it actually means underwear. So
Yeah, well, yeah.
I'm a
Sure.
discovery writer and pantser plot or whatever. But I've also done the plotting thing. And when I was writing Christian fiction, I was very much plotting everything very, very meticulously. And I'm like, no, I kind of want to have. So I started out in this new genre, and I'm like, well, I'm going to plot everything out because this is what I know. And I was working it. The book was good. But I'm like, man, I hate this process. I am
Hmm.
not having a good time. So I still have it, but I scrapped. It's still around. And I just said, just let me just write what I feel like writing and let me figure it out as I go. And man, I'm having a blast. But I know all this. I've learned this about myself. So I rambled, but the point being, figure out what it is you want to do and then get your hands dirty in the process of creating. And then realize that there are so many avenues to marketing now. You can go totally direct. You can have a subscription model. You can sell 100% ebooks and never worry about paperbacks. You can do all paperback. You can do audiobooks. You don't have to do audiobooks. You can go traditional, you can go independent, you can be hybrid. And I think that's make your choice, just not a vanity press.
Yes,
That's
that
that's
is
a
not a choice.
non-negotiable. No.
Never a choice, for
Thou
sure.
shalt not.
Well, this has been an excellent discussion. We are running a little short on time. Before we end, I always love to ask, where can people find more information about you and your books?
Yeah, so everything is at my newly launched website, chadpettit.com. That's Pettit, chadpettit.com. Everything is there. I don't have a whole lot because, like I said, I'm starting over. But you can find me on TikTok, Chad Pettit or CA Pettit. I actually have two accounts, but chadpettit.com is where you're going to find all that stuff.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure that's in the show notes. Thank you so much. This has been a great discussion.
I had a blast. Thank you so much for having me on.
I hope you found that interview helpful. I really enjoyed talking to Chad, just hearing his frank perspective in his past in writing, the things he's gone through, what he's experienced. It was really just open, and it helped me realize, think a lot about my writing style and my reading style. I think about the books that I've really enjoyed, the books that I have not enjoyed as much, and a lot of it is around characters and them being realistic within their setting. If they're not, it really does. I do struggle with that a little bit as a reader, so I try not to do that as an author. Obviously, it's hard. Sometimes you miss things, but being true, being authentic to your characters, to the story, is a really big piece of successful writing, I believe. So, in any case, if you have questions for Chad or you'd like to look him up, his links will be in the show notes, as I mentioned prior to this. Next week, we'll be talking to Seth Ring, who actually writes fantasy and lit RPG books. He's a very successful independent author. He has gone full time. We talk about world building. He actually has a podcast around world building that's incredible. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but you want to join us next week as we dive into world building, how to go about it, the things to think about when you're considering it. And yeah, it's just a really great conversation. I think you'll enjoy that. If you'd like to join me on my podcast, as usual, you can head to dankenner.com/podcast, fill out the form, share this podcast with your friends, let other authors know where they can find encouraging and helpful content. And if you have any recommendations for me, definitely email me at authordkenner@gmail.com, or you can just head to dankenner.com and submit the form with those recommendations. I definitely want to serve you as my listeners and help you feel like you're getting the content that's helpful for you. So once again, thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great week.